My phone rang while I was already dressed. Travis was the one. I believed that he was on his way, he said over the phone, perhaps to let me know that he was eager to see me in the courthouse, perhaps to explain how he loved me very much. Rather, I responded with a smile on my face and heard only breathing. Then, gradually, he said, Savannah, I can't marry you. Taking care to avoid shattering anything delicate, I can still picture the world slanting like if someone had lifted the floor from beneath me. I had spent that morning brushing powdered sugar off my sleeves, trying not to cry when Mama kept fussing over the seating diagram. Aunt Louise had driven up from Alabama, and I had given her my best smile. Shelby, a friend, tried to ignore the silence while twisting my hair into beautiful curls. Something wasn't quite right, and I felt a flutter of anxiety in my chest. However, I couldn't have been ready for those statements, even with that silent warning. I am unable to wed you. The phone fell out of my could as well have been a thunderclap when it struck the wooden floor with a gentle thud. The space went quiet. Mama was correcting her lipstick in front of the mirror when she looked up. My dad froze in mid-step after bringing in a fresh cup of coffee. For a wild second, no one made any movement. Then, almost to myself, I muttered, he's not coming. What Mama blinked and then began to shake her head. Do you mean he's not coming? I said, that's not funny, Savannah. Stop joking. I'm not joking. As though she could hear what I had just said, the silence in the room was a whirl after he changed. His mind, became a commotion, with plates clattering in the kitchen and Mama yelling, what to even let others know. Shelby hurried over to me with her arms out, but I didn't want anyone to caress me. I was unable to be comforted. I felt empty, like if someone had scooped ice up to the window, letting everything out of me and leaving a girl-shaped shell wearing a borrowed veil and a white dress. The folding chairs were already set up outside, and there were balloons attached to the porch and railing. I observed my young cousin playing with flower petals as they bobbed softly in the wind. She was wearing the pink dress we recently purchased. Together in the front yard. Week, everything seemed regular, but nothing was usual anymore. The air smelled like spring and peach pie. My mother was already on the phone with someone, most likely my aunt. When I cautiously turned around to face my parents, Daddy simply stood there staring at me as he tried to figure out how to undo a wedding in less than an hour, stared at damaged engines or shattered fences as if he was already considering a solution. But he was unable. Toy muttered, I can't remain here. Where would you go? Daddy asked. I don't just not here, you know. Then, as if in response to a divine response, my phone buzzed. Once more. I scooped it up and heard Aunt Jolene say there was no need for little talk. She said in a calm, matter-of-fact tone, come stay, darling, and pack your bag. With me for some time. I hung up and left the room without even saying goodbye. Without removing the veil or grabbing my shoes. I simply walked out of the room while still wearing the dressed out front door, into a new existence I hadn't anticipated. Into the Georgia warmth. I sobbed until I was on the bus. Observing my face against the dusty window, I didn't realize it yet, but the bus to Willow Creek was the beginning of everything. The old town fell away behind me. I chose the last row, even though it was half vacant since I didn't want to converse. I didn't want anyone to stare at me for too long and start asking questions. The dress was still on, but my veil was gone. The lace caught close to my hip, crumpled and soiled from the journey. I hadn't had the bravery to transform. It seemed to be the only thing keeping my body together. If I removed it, I would fall apart. Glanced out the window, feeling sick to my stomach at every bump in the road. As we went by tin-roofed homes. Garments, wide fields, and ruined fences lines flapping in the breeze. It all appeared so commonplace. So tragically, Aunt Jolene was already there when I got off the bus. Not realizing that my whole existence had just fallen apart, she wore a denim jacket and waited, her hair piled high on her head as usual. She wore a blazer over her church dress, as if she was unsure whether she was attending a cattle sale or a Sunday service, simply nodded, grabbed up my suitcase and said, "Let's get you somewhere quiet." She didn't say anything when she saw me. We passed her small yellow cottage with a porch swing, which we assumed was her home. But we didn't drive there. My heart sunk a little when I turned down a gravel lane that ran toward the outside of town. Past the wind chimes. She drove up in front of an old brick, so perhaps she changed her mind. Or perhaps I wasn't even welcome there. Structure with fading paint on one side and vines climbing up the other magnolia oven, chipped but still readable above the door. "Hold on," I said. She turned off the engine and turned to face me, saying, "Savannah, if I take you into you know what the neighbors will say about my house right now? They'll be rapping on my door before dark, begging to understand why the fugitive bride set up camp in my guest room." But she pointed to me. Hands were shaking as I walked toward the building. "No one will bother you here. I don't even know how to be alone," Aunt Jolene said, reaching for the door handle. "You were alone the moment that man decided he didn't love you enough to come see you. Honey, but being a bit softer, being alone, isn't necessarily a bad thing. Sometimes it's a chance to rediscover who you are." The old bakery's interior smelled of smoke, dust, and something else, something warm below all the deterioration. Featured towering ceilings, blackened wooden beams with years of oven heat, and sunlight coming through cracks windows, illuminating rusting equipment and flower-covered tables with golden striations. "This location hasn't been before studying." She turned on a light that flickered once a week and said, "Touched in years. There used to be 10 people working. It's only ghosts and old legends now." She showed me a tiny back chamber. Featuring a desk, a bed with a metal frame, and a bookcase filled with decaying cookbooks. Folded at the foot of the mattress was a quilt with a subtle scent of thyme and lavender. She answered. I cleaned up as best I could and put my luggage down. "You have running water, power, and a lock on the door. It's safe, it's not the Ritz, and it's yours for however long you need it." I stood there, absorbing everything. Then I felt something other than despair for the first time since the phone. Calm, not hope precisely, but a glimmer, a halt in that pain, a silence. I remarked, "I'm not sure how to express my gratitude." "You don't," she answered. Already halfway out the door. "But if you're going to stay, don't just sit here in the dark and feel sorry for yourself. You'll be using your hands here to clean, reorganize, paint, bake, anything." She was right. I didn't know. I wanted to fight, but I refrained. I was lying motionless, unable to figure out who I was anymore. That evening, I sat still wearing my bridal gown. I sat on the edge of the tiny bed and listened to the hum of silence. In the stream of the walls, only the sound of my own breathing filled the void. Only I, not Travis or Mama, understood where I was, once feeding an entire community. The bones of an old bakery should have been lonely, but in some ways, it seemed like the beginning of something tangible. When I awoke the following morning, light was pouring in through the dusty windows, and I was momentarily distracted by the distant sound of a rooster. And then I noticed the luggage near the entrance, the chipped white paint on the walls, and the worn beams above, and it wasn't until noon that I realized I was no longer a bride. And I eventually pulled off the dress and hanged up Dotted next to the abandoned utility aprons in the small cupboard. Seeing it there, white and crushed, with the scent of aged wood and yeast all around, felt metaphorical in a way I wasn't prepared to describe. I swept all day and dust adhered to every eye, cleaned the old surface like memories. Opened the windows and let the wind blow out as much of it as it could. I removed the cracked dishes from the shelf, shook out the rugs, and repurposed the counters. I sat by the enormous brick oven in the kitchen once it was clean enough to breathe in. Even though I had no idea why I bothered, center of the room and ran my palm along the edge of the bricks, which were sturdy and substantial despite being blackened from years of use. Leaning down, he took a deep breath and noticed something dim beneath the dust. Smelled like caramelizing sugar and warm dough. A memory I didn't have. The walls were haunted by someone else's. Story. I murmured to you. If you could talk the oven, I'm sure you'd have a great time. That evening, I visited the small I went to the basic store on the corner to get some goods. And as I entered, the bell jingled above the door. All eyes turned to me at once. It was a small town, and I knew what they saw. And a stranger, a young lady purchasing dish soap in single portions, and the rumors had already begun. A woman in her 50s wearing cat-eye spectacles and wearing a name tag that said, "You." "Must be Jolene's niece," Cheryl replied, leaning over the register as if it were a secret storage box. "I heard you were staying at the old bakery." That's a smile too big to be innocent, strange. "I guess I'm uncommon," I said, attempting to seem less serious than I people still remember the bread from there, and I used to steal a peek. "Well, that place has got bones," she said. "The best sourdough I've ever had. Cut before school when Miss Loretta was in charge of the Oven's Delicious." I remembered that name, Loretta. I returned to the bakery. And made of the air was humid, and somewhere in the woods. They had a simple dinner and sat by the window. As the sky grew darker, cicadas were yelling behind the store as if they had something to prove. And the fragrance kept coming to mind, all about how it felt to scrub a counter till it was shiny and how the oven appeared to hum when I touched it. The wanna move was pulling at me from within. What if I did? The calm, almost absurd thought came to me. I had never baked anything from scratch before, not without maybe it was the silence, but something about this area, whether it was a box mix or a YouTube tutorial, made me want to study. Perhaps it was the oven, or perhaps it was the fact that I had nothing left to lose. Aunt Jolene arched an eyebrow when I asked her about Miss Loretta the following morning. Why? "I'd like to learn how to bake." She looked at me for a while, then nodded. "Fortunately for you, Loretta is still alive and resides in Birch. Don't get your hopes up, though, since she's as stubborn as a mule and it's only 15 minutes down the highway. Twice as specific. However, she is the best person to instruct you." Suddenly, Aunt Jolene's old pickup grew, and the first spark of something new started to glow. The entire route to Birch Hollow, which wound through fields and woodland until spilling out close to. A battered small Miss Loretta, a woman I knew, lived in a cottage with green shutters and sunflowers drooping over the fence. She answered the door. We hadn't met, but her name already made me think of yeast and cinnamon, small and wiry, with silver curls tucked back in a scarf before we knocked, and her eyes examined me like a ledger, and her hands, which appeared to have been used to wrestling, though for 40 years, were quick, keen. She crossed her arms and added, "No nonsense. You're the fugitive bride from Wayland. I'm Savannah. I'm flushed." I didn't believe it would get this far. I succeeded. "I'd like to know if you were a baker." At Magnolia Oven, Miss Loretta didn't move. I hesitated as she glanced at me, then at Jolene, and back again. DIDN, single quotes. T know how to explain that after being abandoned at the altar. I wasn't allowed to bake, just like I needed to breathe. I'm not sure who I was anymore, but I know I can't return to my former self. "I simply want to try," I said. Gazed for a little longer before moving aside. "You have flour-resistant shoes?" She had me sweep on the first day of my apprenticeship, but not the kind of sweeping I did at the bakery. This was more of a custom. After that, we wiped out the entire area and laid out the components, such as warriors getting ready for combat. Baking, Miss Loretta explained, it's not merely combining things. its feeling, rhythm, and patience. Doe is aware, oh thief, you're lying. She demonstrated how to do it, and I nodded while laughing nervously and uncertainly how to combine without bruising, how warm the water should be, and how to bloom the yeast. The second batch was better, but still overly wet, whereas the first batch was a disaster. Fell in the pan. Observing my struggle, she added, "Stop fighting it and let it tell you what it needs." I whispered, "Doesn't talk, but it does, just not verbally. You simply must listen with your hands." My body hurt. My fingertips. I didn't sleep that night. It smelt like grain and salt. Yet I had a sensation I hadn't had in months. Involved in the moment and connected to the world by something warm and ascending. Of the weak, I could form the loaves and check their proof by touch, and I could knead without looking down. When I was finally allowed to put one into the oven by myself by Miss Loretta, I held my breath the whole time. And it turned out imperfectly. The crust was too dark. The edges were too brown, a bit thick, but she nodded once as she cut it open and steam emerged. "Not bad," she remarked. "Not great." "Either," I said. She smiled. "You wouldn't need me if it were already perfect." We continued. Each morning, took notes, asked questions, and made a dozen mistakes while working till my arms hurt after driving out to her cottage. Nevertheless, every setback taught me something, and gradually, almost shilly, I started making a magnolia oven as well. Beginning at sunrise, they made a few loaves every day. The town saw the dust drifting in the air like a flower in the golden sunshine. Cheryl from the store was my first customer, who returned 2 days after purchasing a sourdough to inquire if I could make cinnamon rolls. A retired school, I made blunders, burned 3 pots, and scrawled recipes in a notebook when the teacher requested for honeywe but pio placantion to arrive. They desired more than bread. They desired a sense of home and nostalgia. One night I stood in the center of that ancient bakery after cleaning the last of the trays and muttered, "You still with me?" I touched the hot brick oven with my palm, and it seemed to release a breath beneath my hand. I chalked a sign on the door that evening. Open Saturdays knew I was finally learning how to rise, but I wasn't sure whether anyone would come. The aroma of freshly cooked bread that morning, the air was full with rising dough and cinnamon, and I had just pulled a tray when I heard tires crunching on gravel. I heard honey oat loaves coming out of the oven, anticipating Cheryl or one of the regulars. I wiped my hands on my apron, but when my stomach fell when I stepped outside and saw the car, an ancient silver sedan with Georgia plates and a scratch door. Travis stepped out as if he were entering a familiar place, and I realized that he knew that car better than I wanted to admit. The same tentative half smile, but with slouched shoulders and a leaner, paler appearance, as if he had not had a good night's sleep in weeks. "Hey, Savannah," he replied, looking around the front of Magnolia Oven as if he was unaware of my transformation. "Travis," I answered, as flat as a chopping board. I refused to let him in. He lied and said, "I was just passing through." "Right. I've been here before," he said quietly, his gaze focused on the dirt as he looked down the road and then back at me. "I nearly entered when I saw the line of people waiting for your bread a month ago, but I parked across the street instead. Don't know what to say. I had nothing else to say, so I didn't respond. Like a boy awaiting a reprimand, he stood there with his hands in his pockets, moving from foot to foot. "Can we converse?" "You're already doing it," he said, flinching but not giving up. I leaned against the porch, knowing that I had made a mistake that could not be forgiven. "I was scared," he continued, and crossed my arms. "That's one way to describe it. You panicked an hour before, and I panicked because everything felt too enormous and final." I added, "Our wedding," and my voice trembled, not out of sorrow, but out of rage. Held in too long. "Ever since then, I've thought about that day," he added, and I simply want to make it right. If you don't mind, I nearly burst out laughing. I'm just exhausted, not mean. Teal gazed at him, the man I had once pictured growing old next to, building a porch swing with and having children with. I sensed detachment, like if I were recalling a dream about someone who is no longer there. Makes sense. I whispered, "You want to fix it? Travis, tell me something. Did you simply assume that I would remain in a state of infatuation until you had a change of heart? Or did you fall in love with me again?" He blinked. The question was more forceful than he had anticipated. He said, "I just miss you." "What we had is what I miss." "What did we have?" I repeated. "You mean prior to determining that I wasn't sufficient to attend?" His shoulders drooped. "I came not to fight. But I didn't come to listen to sorry. That didn't make a difference." He was standing there with his hands dangling uselessly at his sides, as if he was at a loss for what to do with them. "Perhaps we could try again," I reasoned. "Now I realize I was mistaken. You're unique." I gave a nod. "Yes, I am." He parted his lips, then shut them again. Nothing else could be said. I saw the dust trail behind him as he eventually turned and headed back to his car. Later on, I refrained from crying. I refrained from screaming. I simply took a deep, long breath and felt something finally relax inside of me. I had stopped waiting. After everything had fully settled, I understood that I hadn't simply thrown Travis out. The lady who once determined her value based on someone else's assurances. That me, the one who pleaded for affection, gifts, and crumbs, were at last gone. I didn't miss her either. That night, when the Suna removed my apron and sat at the large table as the warm amber light filtered through the bakery windows as it dipped beyond the trees, I formed the dough on a wooden table. With the exception of the sound of the wall clock and the aroma of freshly baked bread, I grabbed the drawer containing my vital documents and took out the business card I had received from Mason a few weeks prior. Not because I didn't want to, but I hadn't given him a call yet, because a part of me had been anticipating whether the past would be the first to knock. It had now, and I had responded. In quiet, I took the phone and punched in the number. "On." The second ring, he answered. "Mason Carter, is this person? It's Magnolia Oven, Savannah Mason." A moment, then affectionately, "I wanted to know when you would contact me." "I'm ready," I said. "Let's have a conversation." Mason arrived 2 days later, holding a leather folder in one arm and exhibiting the same composed, grounded demeanor that had piqued my interest our initial encounter. Not as a visitor or a customer, he entered Magnolia Oven as though he were a native, but as someone who honored a place's foundations and the lady who preserved them. Now we were seated at my dough table, serving as a conference desk, with sunlight streaming over the floor and a pot of tea between us. "I've looked," he unfolded, "the papers and," replied, "into the property records. The county-owned structures, they're prepared to sell 300,000 apartments. Only old brick and lofty aspirations, no liens or back taxes." I make a soft whistle sound. There are a lot of zeros there. Mason gave a nod. "It is, but it's not possible. I'll pay for it in full for the time being," he added softly. 300,000 is a large sum. However, I'm not spending money on walls. I'm spending money on you. You are the owner. Because without your hands, this area wouldn't exist. Your narrative," I gazed. At him. "You give me 40%. He grinned. "Savannah, this location is already possesses a soul. That is not acceptable to me. I'm here to support its development." I glanced down. Day after day, I was at the table pressing dough into shape with my palms. I considered the burn and the fractured oven mark on my apron, the notebook in which I recorded all of my unintended successes and failed recipes. None of this had come naturally, but it had never been burdensome. You're serious? I replied, completely. I asked, and I slowly nodded. That week, then let's do it. Followed seemed like a deluge of county inspections and paperwork. I completed paperwork that were unclear to me, stayed through meetings pertaining to company licensing and health codes, waited in line at the bank alongside at trembling hands. However, Mason was always available to translate legalese into plain English, reminding me that this was more than simply his investment and comforting me when I felt insignificant. I told the story. I held the deed in my hands on Friday afternoon. I had the magnolia oven. Mine Edmund in perspiration and hope, yours in pen and law. I stood in the center of the bakery that night and gave it some time to sink in. I conducted if oven's bricks were touched by fingers across the same counter, where Miss Loretta used to roll bread as if they were a section of my own back. I was no longer only baking. What I was doing was creating something durable. Mason came to fetch me up early the following morning. He said, I want you to see the stores. Meet the folks who will be selling your bread. It was a peaceful and relaxing drive to the city. He informed me regarding his first store, which began with a single shelf of regional honey and expanded into a chain of marketplaces that provided everything from small batch jams to heirloom tomatoes. He wasn't ostentatious. He didn't mention names. I simply have faith in good food and its producers. As we arrived to the first store's parking lot, my gut twisted with nerves. It wasn't what I expected on the inside, though. No wood shelves instead of corporate gray walls, neon lights, and baskets of fresh produce and the aroma of authentic cuisine. Behind the shop, a girl named Lena waved and grinned. She said to Mason, So this is the baker? I turned red. I'm still learning. All of us are, she added. An elderly man wearing an apron was at the second business stop remarked, You bring that? Cinnamon bread you made last week, and I'll clear a whole shelf. After shaking my hand, I was asked if I cooked dinner rolls by a mother with 2 children. Via the time we returned via car, I had a notebook filled with names, ideas, and requests. My mind hurt, but in the finest manner possible. Not because I'm confused, but from the eye. Mason paused the truck when we arrived to Willow Creek and looked over. You did good today, he told me. I grinned and said, Thanks, I mean it. So Doy didn't feel like a woman who had been abandoned in a wedding gown that evening. I felt like a creator, an owner, a lady who transformed what had broken her into something that could nourish an entire world. Magnolia Oven was more than just a structure 6 months later. It ways lived once more. From sunrise till sunset, 3 ovens burned. The air within is continuously, it had a cinnamon, sugar, and rising dough scent. I now had 5 workers, 2 a retired mailman who fashioned loaves as if they were sacred, and high school students who assisted with preparation and delivery, and Miss Loretta, who continued to oversee twice a week, but primarily when she believed no one was looking, she simply drank tea and grinned. Every day, we baked about 100 loaves. Sourdough challah on Fridays, honey, oats, rosemary, and olive oil. I would occasionally pause leaping butter to a freshly made crust and believing that this happened by accident. Pro meshes to anguish. In response, the town said, on Saturday, people lined up. Visitors came in the mornings before we were opened. Having heard about us from children, were left joyful and sticky-fingered by a food blogger I had never met. Turmoil. It was mine. And it was lovely. Mason fulfilled his promise. He didn't interest, but he did appear, sometimes with new packaging concepts, sometimes with order forms, and occasionally with just 2, how are you holding up? And coffees. He never pressed or demanded more. He was there, always just there, and eventually more than I was willing to give. Something melted within me. One evening, following the completion of a huge batch for a citywide culinary festival, I discovered flowers stained his shirt when he was cleaning the front counter, making him appear less like a businessman and more like someone who belonged. I questioned, "Why you keep coming?" And he gave me a look. "Because I believe in this place and in you," he said, startled by the question before shrugging, somewhere deep. He didn't press. I didn't immediately respond. I didn't have to. As the ovens cooled and the moonlight filtered, we simply stood there in the quiet of the after-hours bakery, through windows covered with flowers. A few days later, Miss Loretta stopped over to pick her up. She sniffed approvingly at the new delivery rack on her routine afternoon visit. She said, "You've built yourself something real," as she watched the batch of buttermilk biscuits cool by the window. Could in single quotes, T have done it without you. I only pointed at the dough. You were the one who waved that away with a snort. Need through the chaos. She then gave me a stern look, and that Mason boy, I hesitated, not because I was unaware, but because I know you like him. However, it's different because acknowledging it meant giving up something I had used as armor. It should be different this time, she said, nodding. That night, Mason stopped by after closure, bringing news from the city and 2 lemonades. We had been highlighted in a little regional journal, not very large, but enough to pique interest and demonstrate the importance of what we were doing. He turned to me as we sipped in silence on the bakery's front steps. "Can I ask me anything, please? Are you still afraid?" I considered it. I considered how I used to wake up and wonder if I would ever feel like myself again. I would think about the voice in my head that used to say, "You're really what he left behind." "No," I replied, "not anymore." He gave a long nod. He gently reached for my palm, and I didn't yank it away. The furnaces inside where the air smelled of wheat, sweat, and something more. And the bread was cooling quietly. The world continued to revolve outside, but here was mine, sweeter, like calm. I still get up before the alarm on some mornings, but not because I have to. My staffium capable of working the early shift now, but I want to because walking has a spiritual quality. Inside a peaceful bakery before anybody else wakes up. Quietness, the scent of cool stone-off flowers falling into the atmosphere. The sensation that today is still being formed, much like a freshly baked loaf. After 6 months, I now realize it was only the oven preheating, but I believed my life was over once. One Sunday, I found myself back at the rear room closet where I had hung my wedding gown months before, and it was still I touched the fabric there. Sandwiched between jackets covered in flowers and aprons. Softly. It didn't squeeze my throat anymore. It was only fabric now, emblem of a life I had nearly had but no longer desired. I grinned instead of crying. Mason was reading on the front porch when I went outside that same afternoon. He squinted into the glare as he gazed up at the delivery invoices. "You look lighter," he replied. "Perhaps I am." He got up. "I wish to show you something." We took a 10-minute drive outside of town to a little piece of flat, open, wind-kissed land that he had bought. I laughed and remarked, "That might be the location of our first storefront." I believed that we could construct a larger establishment that would have both of our names, such as a bakery, cafe, or perhaps even a kitchen. Suddenly uncertain, he looked over. "If you want that, I imagined a wooden porch, fresh bread in the window, laughter, and a view of the grass. Clinking mugs. A community-focused location that goes beyond business. I want it," he grinned and continued, "but only if we build it the way we built this, slow, honest, and together." I understand. That night, I sat with Miss Loretta back at Magnolia. Evan, while a fresh batch of sourdough rose behind the glass while she sipped her chamomile tea. "You've come a long way, sugar," she said. "I had a good teacher," she added, laughing. "You had something greater. Had a purpose." She was correct. I had begged to remember Travis, not to forget him, myself, to keep in mind that I may create something, lovely out of chaos, that I could get back up when everything inside of me had fallen apart. Later, that Travis left me in a white room at night, and I sat in the quiet and wrote something in my journal. Believe he was shattering me, but he just shattered the version of me that was waiting to be valued by someone else. What emerged from those ashes wasn't a maker, a woman who provides for others, a leader who guides with her hands. I am not someone's nearly wife. Rather, I am the one who makes happiness out of wheat and fire. Weeks went by, then months, and I have a darn good oven. Savannah Brooks. Life, actual life. Contented, and the kind that doesn't include extravagant displays or theatricalics. Just work-filled days with sweetness and little side decisions side by side. One night, I watched the sun set behind me from the back doorway. You ever think about that day? The trees and felt arms say as they encircle my waist, the one where it all fell apart. Mason inquired quietly. No, he said in a whisper. I turned to face the man who said, the one where it really began. Had entered my life to build with me rather than save me, and I spoke what I now knew to be true. Each day the bakery smelled warm and comforting. As it kissed my temple as we stood in the doorway as darkness fell, like tomorrow, and I was at last at home. Life can sometimes shatter you so that you can't enable something new emerge from within rather than to destroy you. Savannah wasn't saved by a guy, a business agreement, or even a bakery. She was rescued by her own efforts, the silent healing process. And her narrative serves as a reminder that being left behind isn't the end, but rather a halt. A decision to build rather than to fall. Place. And if you have the courage to breathe, require, and believe once more, you might discover a form of you will not be given the bread of your new existence. Instead, you will be given a stronger, wiser, and more vibrant version of yourself than before. It will require fire, tears, salt, and flour.